Go. There's Red. So I know it's ready. So
Hey,
now we get to talk. And I'm talking to Kip Loui, a
hi y'all.
long-time St. Louis musician. Hope I'm not giving anything away about that, but you've been doing this for a long time. And
Uh,
so let's talk about, how did you first get interested in music?
how did I first? Okay,
Yes.
I'm the youngest of six kids,
Okay.
and there we were growing up in the '70s, and every last one of my brothers and sisters played acoustic guitar, and they would strum alum the acoustic hits of the day, like Simon and Garfunkel, and James Taylor and Neil Young and whatever it would be, right? So that stuff was just in the air in the house. So I never had any formal training. I just learned how to play guitar by I remember my sister had like the Simon and Garfunkel songbook, right? So I would
Really?
take, yeah, yeah. So I would steal her acoustic guitar, and I would look at the fingering on of the song, like the Boxer or Mrs. Robinson or whatever it was, and I would make my fingers go to that position on the neck of the guitar.
Right.
And since I already kind of knew the melody of the song, I could kind of like strum and sing the melody, and I'm entirely self-taught like that. And like, even though I was born in the decade, and didn't experience it because I was just like a little itty bitty kid,
Yeah.
like 60s and 70s music had a sort of profound effect on me, and I spent much of the '80s desperately wishing it was the '60s.
Trying to regain that time, definitely.
Yeah, so I was really into like all the classic bands of the area, the Beatles being the first and foremost, but like
Right.
the Beatles, the band, the Byrds, the Stones, Neil Young. I do find it kind of interesting. Like I hated country music growing up, like really,
Yes.
because I'm from Webster Groves, Missouri, which is like a suburb of St. Louis. So there wasn't a whole lot of country here,
Right.
there wasn't a whole lot of country music. But I tell you what I was exposed to was folk music
Okay.
via our local folk music club, called the Focal Point,
Okay.
which still exists to this day. And like I would hear like just A-team musicians come through town, like Martin Carthy or Steel Ice Fan, or
Oh,
like
wow.
amazing Celtic musicians would come through town, and then like Appalachian folks, and so like I was sort of exposed to all this really cool traditional folk and singer-songwriter stuff from that. And that was probably my doorway into like appreciating, and then even kind of dabbling in traditional country music.
Well, let's ask, when did you first start liking it then?
Country.
Yes.
I was well into my 20s, man.
Right.
Yeah, because up to that point, I was strictly a rock kid. I mean, I was a white boy from the suburbs, so I was just listening to rock. But then like one day, so I was a record store clerk for most of my 20s. And if I'm babbling too much, just stop me at any time.
No.
Okay.
Babble away. Babble
Yeah.
on.
Okay, great. But I was a record store. That's what I did for a living. I was a record store clerk for my 20s, and I worked at let me get it right. I worked at Euclid Records. I worked at Vintage Vinyl here in St. Louis. Both are illustrious and still existing record stores in our fair town.
Around in 2020, which is
right
in itself
a wonderful thing, a wonderful and rare thing. Yeah, they're still going strong. Vintage Vinyl, Euclid Records. But my first gig was at Street Side Records,
right,
in Old Orchard. In
no longer with us.
Street Side. There was one in Columbia too, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. So sure.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so that is a chain that no longer exists. But and then I worked for Tower Records briefly in Seattle.
Really?
I went to college for a couple of years in Seattle in the mid '80s. Yeah,
that's a strange connection.
And I met and befriended the young fresh fellows.
Really?
But that's another story for another time. Yeah, I cut a record with those guys. That was like
Really?
my first record. Yeah, they backed me. I don't know how I got them to do it, but they backed me in the studio as like a 22-year-old college student. I just recently released that record on my Bandcamp page.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's straight up pop rock.
That's amazing. Yes.
Yeah, straight up power pop.
Really?
Record.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so back to country music. So, but there I was in my early to mid 20s, and occasionally people would bring in like Hank Williams records and Johnny Cash records, right? And we're still talking records, vinyl records. And just for the hell of it, one day I like remember throwing on like Hank Williams 40 greatest hits, and it was almost on a whim and almost kind of a joke, because we didn't play a lot of country music at Vintage Vinyl. That's a very urban,
yes,
right, very urban situation. A lot of hip hop, a lot of rap, a lot of soul and R&B, right, which is great stuff. Don't get me wrong. It's all good, right? But so there, and then Hank Williams starts lofting through the PA system of Vintage Vinyl. And I became enthralled. I was just like, his voice just boom. Like I
killer. It's still killer to this day.
Yeah, right. Timeless stuff. And like I really connected with the songwriting and with the lyrics, and just like the really simple but beautiful arrangements and the musicianship, like the whole package. It just moved me. It was like white people soul music, And
so it was just that much of an epiphany and that much of one thing, and it totally changed your mind.
It really did. It really did. And probably my exposure to like traditional folk, that helped me get there, right? But then once I finally heard like old school traditional country music, I was like, this is the bomb. I like this. I like this stuff.
What were the next things that really got your attention?
Yeah. The next things? Okay. Yeah. So then I was trying to figure out, well, how do I incorporate this into like my more rock kind of outlook and background and wheelhouse. Right. So, it was like the Byrds, Sweetheart of the Rodeo.
Oh, absolutely.
And the Flying Burrito Brothers and, early Poco, and all that great kind of early 70s country rock stuff. And the band, I mean, right?
Obviously, yes.
Yeah, right? And like the Buffalo Springfield, they always had a really cool kind of country influence to a lot of their material. Stephen Stills, Richard Furay, it's just so that was kind of like, okay, now I have a way to approach this. Like now I have a sonic kind of conception of how to incorporate country music into my rock thing, you know? And then I'm like, well, okay, so what's going on in country music like now? And this would have been the 80s, right? The late 80s. And then so I'm starting to listen to like Dwight Yoakam, I'm listening to Steve Earle.
Yes.
I'm listening to Foster and Lloyd.
Right.
I'm listening to the Wagoneers. Do you remember them?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And I'm listening to all that like really kind of awesome. Oh, Katie Lang. Katie Lang, man.
Katie Lang was so good.
So good. Such an amazing vocalist. Still is. Yes. And those early country records of hers I revered.
Oh yeah.
And then hey, here's a tie-in for you, Carlene Carter.
Oh yes.
Yeah, man.
Monday's guest on this podcast.
That's
which I have to say I am so excited about. I mean, I'm
excited about it. I'm excited for you. So yeah, man. So and that was like commercial country music. You could tune into commercial country and hear Dwight Yoakam. And most of that is gone now, sadly. Like, let's not even talk about contemporary country. I mean, there's still guys,
there's
and gals,
still stuff, but it's not like it was at that time. Definitely,
right? There's unquestionably still wonderful practitioners of kind of straight ahead country music. You got your Chris Stapletons, you got your
Marty Stewart.
Marty, it goes without saying. Marty Stewart, yeah. You got all those great guys, and gals. Let's not forget them. But yeah. So anyway, that's kind of how I arrived to to country music. So there it is. It's by now it's the 90s, you know.
Right. And are you
And
back in St. Louis at that time?
okay, so I went to school in Seattle for 2 years, and this is just before grunge and Kurt Cobain and all that, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then I moved back home, and then 3 or 4 years later, I'm like, I'm moving back to Seattle, and I'm gonna pursue music, and I'm gonna da, da, da. And I decided I was gonna start my country band in Seattle at the height of grunge, which was a really bad business model. Yeah, like that was doomed to failure.
Yes.
So after trying that for about a year, I'm like, yeah, this is no good. So and like I couldn't find work. You know, I was like, there were like stacks of applications that thick for dishwashing jobs, and you know, because like by then everybody was moving to Seattle and rents were getting ridiculous, and now they're even twice as bad. You know, so I moved back home, man. I didn't know what else to do. I just moved back home because at least I had family and friends there and a support system.
There was a burgeoning country scene in St. Louis. And so tell me about that.
Aha, right. So at that time, now we got to back up a little bit. Now we're back in the late 80s. So we're you know, I started to befriend these young dudes who I started seeing around town. Their names were Jay Farrar and Jeff Tweedy.
Yes, I've heard
and
of that.
Mike Hydehorn, and they were in this. They were in this band. You might have heard of them. They were called Uncle Tupelo. And I was a front row fan, you know. And then I started like kind of talking to them after their gigs, and you know, I knew a little tiny bit about the music business at that point. And I'm like, guys, you know, have you sent out like demo tapes to any labels? And they're like, and Jay Farrar is like, well, no, not really. You know, man, a few words, right? You know, so and I'm like.
Never had many words. Never.
Yeah, right. Never. A man, a few words. He is very articulate with few words. Anyway, so and I'm like, well, shit, man. Let me mail out some stuff on your behalf. Like, I'm happy to do that. Because I loved what they were doing. They were combining, especially in those early days, they were combining like punk rock with country music, sort of. Yes, it was their take on country rock, right? Yeah, it was great stuff. So I was a big fan and a big proponent, you know, big supporter in the early days. And I think I'm mentioned in like a best of compilation of Uncle Tupelo as like an early.
That's awesome.
Like not manager. I would never say manager, but I was like a dude who was like pushing them to like little labels that I happen to know the A&R guy there. You know? Exactly. And I think I still have a rejection letter from SST Records, you know, saying, yeah, this is kind of cool. Send us something in 6 months after they developed a little bit, you know. And by then they were like, you know, they were already big. Yeah, no, I loved their aesthetic and where they were coming from. So then I'm like, well, I kind of want to do something like that, but I knew I was not a real like I wanted to somehow blend that with my more pop sensibilities because like Marshall Crenshaw was kind of my hero at that time. It still is, you know, he's still one of my music.
And, you know, you remember that in the middle of we should mention The Center of Nowhere, which is a wonderful movie about this stuff. And I need to point out that Marshall Crenshaw was always called Marvin Bradshaw by Lou Whitney. And so that is just so funny. I don't understand it, but that is his relation and to this whole thing. And I got to mention that thing because The Center of Nowhere is not only a wonderful film, but now it has a wonderful additional thing on it about, and all the extras on the DVD is all wonderful. But go ahead and talk about the stuff and Marshall Crenshaw.
Oh, Lou Whitney and the Skeletons. Oh,
no doubt.
Are you kidding? You know, yeah, man. I saw them live many, many times at Off Broadway in St. Louis. You know,
right?
And they were like, they should have been 10 times bigger than they were. But any roots rock musician worth their salt reveres the Skeletons and Lou Whitney. Those guys. You know, all. God, you know. Anyway, so but I have a funny Marshall Crenshaw story too. So anyway, Marshall was like my hero in my musical hero in high school. Because he was sort of updating all that 60s and 50s pop that I loved, right? Yeah. And so he was my guy along with like Nick Lowe and Rock Pile and you know, Los Lobos.
You're speaking my language. Dad.
Yeah, man, right. All that Lone Justice, all those amazing bands,
Right.
the Blasters, and yeah. X,
I actually heard recently that Marshall Crenshaw wants to do a documentary on Tom Wilson, the famous producer of Bob Dylan. I thought that was so cool.
Oh, that's way cool,
I
man.
just think it's so cool to think about.
He is a rock music historian himself,
Yes.
in addition to being an amazing songwriter. So I could see Marshall doing that.
Who's been on the podcast is the person that told me that, and I think that's so cool to think about having that thing to look forward to as well.
Yeah, he has been a source of delight for me for decades. Anyway, so my brief Marshall Crenshaw story is so I have along the way I became friends with the dudes in the Bottle Rockets,
Right?
Brian Henneman, and Mark Ortman and John Horton especially. Way back now where are we? This is 17 years ago. So 17 years ago, the word on the street is Brian Henneman wants to put together a country cover band,
right,
for shits and grins and to make a few bucks when he's not out touring with the Bottle Rockets, right? And I at that point was already playing in a tremendous country cover band called the Rock House Ramblers.
Oh yes,
that also put out 3 albums of original material. Right.
Definitely.
Yeah, the Rock House Ramblers, I look back fondly on that band, and we were doing like straight up country stuff. So I already knew 50 to 100 like classic country songs.
Right.
I'm like, wow, I wonder if I approach Brian Henneman, like maybe I can offer my services, because I can strum a guitar, an acoustic guitar, and sing harmonies pretty well,
You'd have to play his backup, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Play second fiddle, and I would be happy to do that, right? So, and I contacted Brian, and amazingly, he's like, "Yeah, dude, come on over. Why don't you?
Let's do it.
Let's do it." And I'm like, "Woo!"
Brian, he's just so nice, and he's that guy, and he knows everything about music that you ever want to know.
Can I please talk about Brian Henneman for about a minute?
Please do.
Okay, so, and this is all sincere and heartfelt.
Right.
Brian Henneman is one of the smartest human beings I know.
He sure is.
But he is also incredibly talented and tremendously humble about it all.
And he also loves Carlene Carter as much as we do.
And he loves Carlene Carter as much as you do. Yeah, right. Brian Henneman is a working man's hero. He is. His songs are grounded in everyday reality. He grew up. He's the real deal. He grew up in small town Missouri.
Yes.
He's not having to project or pretend. He is that guy.
Right.
He grew up listening to country music and AC/DC and especially Leonard Skinner. And it's all in there. It's all in his songwriting.
It sure is.
And it's real and it's genuine and so is he, and he's funny as shit. He is a funny dude.
He sure is.
But he's like tremendously humble about his own abilities, and I've always loved that about him. And he's just an ace songwriter. Anyway, so there's my little love letter to Brian. And I've now played in his side project for 17 years, and it's been nothing but fun. But anyway, so backing up, so that name of that band is Diesel Island. We are still a thing. You're still a band.
Yes.
We're not playing out now because of COVID.
Nobody is.
Yeah, nobody is. Right. So as soon as COVID lets up, I imagine we will resume activity. But we've been together now 17 years. We have released exactly one record in that amount of time. It is all original music, even though we're a country cover band. And it consists of songs that I wrote along with Carl Pandolfi and Richard Trallis, who are two Diesel Island bullpen members. Right. And Brian, he's like, no, man, I can't give Diesel Island any songs. Those have to go to the Bottle Rockets.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, I was but he plays guitar in the whole record. Yeah, he lends his considerable guitar playing talents to the Diesel Island record, which you can get from our Bandcamp site, from my Bandcamp site.
It's promote that because there's a lot of good stuff on there. And we also want to mention, because we got so much stuff to talk about, what we need to talk about, your wife, JJ.
Oh, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
So I have never not released music or been in bands since I was in my early 20s, right? I've been doing this for a while now, as you say. And but last year, this year. What am I saying? It was March of this year, of this dreadful year. Again, my business instincts are always great. They're always, I put out like what I consider my best album at the beginning of a global pandemic. My wife is also a singer-songwriter. She's multi-talented and does many things, but she also writes songs. And she had 5 or 6 great ones lying around. And I'm like, it is time. It was overdue for us to record your songs.
Right.
So we put out a husband and a wife record. It's called Kip and JJ Loui Show Me State.
Right, which is so fun for what we're doing.
Right. So and the whole concept of Show Me State is it's 12 original story songs and character sketches about people living across Missouri, the Show Me State, So it's people from different vantage points, different kind of socioeconomic backgrounds. The songs go from rock to country to almost kind of jazzy to sort of bluesy to, and Jay wrote 3 of them and sings lead vocals on 5. And so if you can find it on our Bandcamp page, it's just Kip Loui at bandcamp.com, and you'll find my whole vast catalog there, including Kip and JJ Loui Show Me State.
Yes.
Which I'm very proud of. And here's a big feature of it. The backing band for that record was 3/4 of the Bottle Rockets, including Mr. Henneman. Yes.
Okay.
So it's Brian Henneman on guitar, John Horton on bass. Interestingly,
wow.
He's also an incredible bassist.
I love John. He's such a great guy.
He is a beautiful human being inside and out. I used to be related to him, but that's another story.
That sounds like another podcast.
I was married to his sister. Yeah, and I no longer am, but it's okay.
He still loves you. That's
we are still bosom buddies. Yeah, we're good. Anyway, so John played bass on this record, and the thing about John Horton is he's as good a bassist as he is a guitarist, which is saying so. He plays bass like a bassist, like it's his primary instrument. And people who are players will understand what I mean by that. Like he's a badass on bass. Anyway, so John plays bass, and the only reason I didn't tap Keith, good old Keith, who I also love, is he lives out of town. He doesn't live in St. Louis. Definitely. He's the only Bottle Rocket who does not live in St. Louis. So I had to use musicians who were available because we were recording this on the fly and on the cheap, and yeah. So it's Henneman on guitar, John Horton on bass, Mark Ortman, amazing Bottle Rockets drummer, on drums. My dear friend Carl Pandolfi on piano, who is one of St. Louis's most stellar pianists, and JJ sings and plays harmonica on a couple of songs and acoustic guitar, just like me. And the whole deal was recorded and engineered by David Toretta, who a lot of people may not know that name, but he was Chuck Berry's longtime producer.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, he produced Chuck's very last posthumous record that came out right before, right after he died.
Right.
And he was Chuck's recording engineer for at least the last 20 years.
Wow.
So he didn't go back to the Chess records or anything like that, but for the last 20 years, Dave was Chuck Berry's recording engineer.
He got that good guitar sound that we all loved. Every time at Blueberry Hill, it was so good.
You bet. And in the last couple years of Chuck's life, I think Dave played bass in his band, because Dave is himself an amazing bass, Berkeley trained musician. So we recorded it with David Toretta in his studio here in St. Louis. And the sounds that we got out of his studio are so good and so affordable. So there's another plug for people looking for a good affordable studio in St. Louis with somebody with good ears, because that's 9/10 of the battle right there.
Right, definitely.
Dale, I'm sorry. I'm domineering this.
No.
Hardly a conversation. This is me babbling. This is what I do. I babble.
To listen to the stuff that you're telling me, because we're talking about all the same music and we've got different stories, but it's all the same thing. I mean, it all lends into the people and the places we want to honor with this project we're doing.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so what can I tell you about? You mentioned the Rock House Ramblers.
Sure.
Go ahead. Go.
No. You got a thought. Go ahead.
So the Rock House Ramblers were together for about 5 years. We managed to release 3 albums. That band featured Dade Farrar, who's Jay's brother.
Oh, yes.
Who is himself an excellent songwriter and tremendous vocalist.
Right.
Dade is more of a country singer, like
yes.
for real old school bluegrass.
I remember Brian tell stories about Dade in the old days as well. Yes.
Yeah, and he plays upright bass, and so for like bluegrass and traditional country and rockabilly, he's the dude. Like he's who you want in your band. And just a great songwriter. Like even if his last name wasn't, I don't care who he's related to. Like he's just great in and of himself. Right. And at first I was kind of like, oh, he's Jay's brother, but you quickly forget about that. And he's
as we all were about those guys. Definitely.
Yeah, sure. But Dade is his own guy. And also Gary Hunt, who is sort of an elder statesman of our roots music scene here in St. Louis. And he was in the band Sunvolt as a touring musician for many years. And he does duo gigs to this day, I believe, with Jay.
Really?
Yeah. So Gary Hunt was instrumental in the Rock House Ramblers, and then John Horton, who at that point was my brother-in-law. So he was, in fact, he and I started the Rock House Ramblers.
Right.
And then last but not least, Danny Kathreiner, who he was primarily known as a drummer in St. Louis until he started his own bands to play his own songs.
Okay.
So, and he is himself an excellent songwriter.
Right.
So St. Louis has just got a rich tradition of musicians and songwriting, man.
Definitely.
Yeah, like it across many genres. So we are blessed that way.
And now we need to talk about getting you and JJ on here later to do your own 5 at 5 with music. We need to figure out how to do that because that needs to happen, definitely.
And she's much more attractive than me. So that would
well, that's great. I like that as well.
She's a lot prettier than me. So that would be great, man. We would be honored.
That would be wonderful. And I'd love to have you. And so now I think that I just say, we're doing this stuff from Missouri. We're doing this project to benefit Missouri musicians. And look at you, Lou. What are you doing?
One last thing.
Sure.
Okay. Because I was told I needed to mention this, but I was tickled to do it. So my understanding is DJ Lance is on your board of directors,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Okay. I worked alongside of Lance at Vintage Vinyl in St. Louis. He was also a record store clerk, and we our time there overlapped. So I worked with Lance probably for 2 years, and I haven't talked to him in years, but man, I can tell you that when he became famous and the dude he is known as, nobody was surprised. None of us were surprised. He is that charismatic. Like the guy you see on TV is basically Lance.
Exactly.
He is a colorful character.
He's just that good and that genuine a guy.
He is. He's very genuine. He's very animated. He too is very funny. He's larger than life and just a lovely guy. Yeah. So, hey, Lance, if you're out there, hi.
Yeah, definitely. I just love the people we got on this thing. And it's so fun to get to talk about this stuff and interview musicians like you. And so that's why I love having you on. And thank you for coming on this podcast. So
happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Let me know if I can ever do anything for you.
Okay, well, let's get you and JJ on to do a full-on musical 5 at 5.
Yeah. Soon. I mean, we got crappy microphones and stuff, but maybe we can borrow these.
We'll make it work. It'll be beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
See you later.
Thanks, Dale.
Okay.
Bye.